Ravanachari Anachari Jayo Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Jaya Kodanitai Maya Poshashi Kodanitai Maya Poshashi Jaya Kodanitai Maya Poshashi Kodanitai Maya Poshashi Jaya Prabhupada 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 Prabhupada, 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 Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Gurudev, 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 Gurudev. Jaya Jaya Gurudev, 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 Gurudev. Iskon Govinda Ki, Prabhupada Ki Jai. Shri Kodanitai Maya Poshashi Ki. So it's a special day today, so we're going to read from the folder. Is this what it is? Okay, so Nityananda Trodashi. So it's before that, no? Nityananda Trodashi. Putra, Mother Ranjini's disappearance, Devananda Pandit. Okay, we'll get there. Bhagavad Goswami. Srila Prabhupada's disappearance. So that must be forward. It's after, yeah. So we've got let your feet adore my head. Oh, I see. It's before Nityananda Trodashi, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, so it's in there somewhere. And who's the other one? Ramachandra. Okay, so I'll read Ramachandra Kaviraj. Ramachandra Kaviraj, the son of Chiranjeeva Sena, appeared In Sri Kanda, although married, he and his wife, Ratanala, had no material attachments. They stayed fully engaged in the loving service of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. They had no children. With steadfast devotion, he served as spiritual master, Srinivasacharya, in Vrindavan. Sri Jiva Goswami gave him the title Kaviraj, King of Poets. Ramachandra Kaviraj was one of the 8 Kaviraj's famous poet disciples of Srinivas Acharya. Ramachandra wrote Smarna Darpana, Smarna Chamatkara, Siddhanta Chandrika. He preached widely, and initiated many disciples. Narottam Das Thakur and Ramachandra lived together as best friends. Narottam Das wrote, Doya Koro Sri Acharya Prabhu Srinivas Ramachandra Sangha Mage Narottam Das. O Srinivas Acharya Prabhu, please give me your mercy. Narottam Das always prays for the association of Ramachandra Kaviraj. In the form of Karna Manjari, he serves Srimati Radharani in Braj Leela. His samadhi is in Dira Samira Kunj in Vrindavan, next to Srinivasacharya's. Shri Ramachandra Kaviraj Thakur ki. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 6, Chapter 14, entitled King Chitraketu's Lamentation. And it's text 41. So we're just going to read through a few translations until we get to a purport, which is not till 52. Translation. Even maid servants who are constantly engaged in rendering service to the husband are honored by the husband, and thus they have nothing for which to lament. Our position, however, is that we are maid servants of the maid servants. Therefore, we are most unfortunate. Sri Shukadeva Goswami continued, being neglected by their husband and seeing Krita Jyuti's opulence in possessing a son, Krita Jyuti's co-wives always burned in envy, which became extremely strong. As their envy increased, they lost their intelligence. Being extremely hard-hearted and unable to tolerate the king's neglect, they finally administered poison to the son. Unaware of the poison administered by her co-wives, Queen Krita Jyuti walked within the house thinking that her son was sleeping deeply. She did not understand that he was dead. Thinking that her child had been sleeping for a long time, Queen Krita Jyuti, who was certainly very intelligent, ordered the nurse, "My dear friend, please bring my son here." When the maidservant approached the child who was lying down, she saw that his eyes were turned upward. There were no signs of life, all the senses having stopped, and she could understand that the child was dead. Seeing this, she immediately cried, "Now I am doomed," and fell to the ground. In great agitation, the maidservant struck her breast with both hands and cried loudly in regretful words. Hearing her loud voice, the queen immediately came. And when she approached her son, she saw that he was suddenly dead. In great lamentation, her hair and dress in disarray, the queen fell to the ground, unconscious. O King Parikshit, hearing the loud crying, all the inhabitants of the palace came, both men and women, being equally aggrieved. They also began to cry. The queens who had administered the poison also cried pretentiously, knowing full well their offense. When King Chitraketu heard of his son's death from unknown causes, he became almost blind. Because of his great affection for his son, his lamentation grew like a blazing fire. And as he went to see the dead child, he kept slipping and falling on the ground. Surrounded by his ministers and other officers and the learned Brahmins present, the king approached and fell unconscious at the child's feet, his hair and dress scattered. When the king, breathing heavily, regained consciousness, his eyes were tearful and he could not speak. When the queen saw her husband, King Chitraketu, emerged in great lamentation and saw the dead child, who was the only son in the family, she lamented in various ways. This increased the pain in the cause of the hearts of all the inhabitants of the palace, the ministers, and all the Brahmins. The garland of flowers decorating the queen's head fell, and her hair scattered. Falling tears melted the collyrium on her eyes and moistened her breasts, which were covered with kumkum powder. As she lamented the loss of her son, her loud crying resembled the sweet sound of a kurari bird. So text 54. Aho vidatas tvam ativa balisho. Aho vidatas tvam ativa balisho. Yas tu atma shristi apriti rupam ihase. Yas twatma shrishyat parati rupam ihase. Pare nu jivati aparasya ya mitya. Pare nu jivatya parasya yat mitya. Viparyas chet tvam asi dhruva para. Viparyas chet tvam asi dhruva para. Aho vidatas tvam ativa balisho. Yas tvatma shrishtyat pariti rupam ihase. Hare nu jivacha parashayat mritya. Viparasyas chat tvam asi dhruva para. Aho vidatas tvam ativa balisho. Yas tvatma shrishtyat apritiya rupam hasi. Hare nu jivatya parashaya mitya. Viparasya chatvam asi dhruva para. Vidatas tam ativa balisho. Yastvatma shrishta japarupatam esse. Ashayan mritya. Viparyas chatvam asi dhruva para. Ativa balisho. Yastvatma shrishta japarupatam. Harenu jivatya parashaya mitya. Viparyas chatvam asi dhruva para. Ahovitas tvam ativa balisho. Yes, ladies. Hovitastas twamativa balasho. Shriyasya paripam marse. Renjivakya parashayamatir. Aho, alas in great lamentation. Vidata, O Providence. Tvam, you. Ativa, very much. Balisha, inexperienced. Yaha, who? To, indeed, Atmashristi, of your own creation. Apati Rupam, just the opposite. Ihasi, you are performing and desiring. Pare, while the father or the elder. Nu, indeed. Jivati is living. Aparasha, of one who was born later. Ya, which, mriti, death. Vipariyaya, contradictory. Chat, if. Tvam, you. Asi, Dhruva, indeed. Para, an enemy. Translation, oh, alas, O Providence, O Creator, you are certainly inexperienced in creation. For during the lifetime of a father, you have caused the death of his son, thus acting in opposition to your creative laws. If you are determined to contradict these laws, you are certainly the enemy of living entities and are never merciful. Responsibly, please. Alas, O Providence, O Creator, you are certainly inexperienced in creation. For during the lifetime of a father, you have caused the death of his son, thus acting in opposition to your creative laws. If you are determined to contradict these laws, you are certainly the enemy of living entities and are never merciful. This is the way a conditioned soul condemns the Supreme Creator when he meets reverses. Sometimes he accuses the Supreme Personality of Godhead of being crooked because some people are happy and some are not. Here the Queen blames Supreme Providence for her son's death. Following the creative laws, a father should die first and then his son. If the creative laws are changed according to the whims of Providence, then Providence certainly should not be considered merciful, but must be considered inimical to the created being. Actually, it is not the Creator, but the conditioned soul who is inexperienced. He does not know how the subtle laws of fruitive activity work. And without knowledge of these laws of nature, he ignorantly criticizes the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Om Jnana Timiranda Shaganandjana Shalakaya Chakshunan Militam Jena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktarinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchakalpatarubhyasta Kipasindubhyevacha Paritanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So the Queen is lamenting, and she's blaming Providence, Creator, and sees the Creator and Providence as the cause of her son being killed. And Prabhupada goes on to say that this is how a conditioned soul condemns the Supreme Creator when he meets reverses. Sometimes he accuses the Supreme Personality of Godhead of being crooked. So it's interesting, in Srila Prabhupada refers in the Bhagavad Gita that material attachment breaks down into different aspects, and one of them is the conception of void, which underlies the frustration of life. So that's interesting, isn't it? So you get frustrated, you blame God, and then you get really frustrated, and you decide, never mind blaming God, God doesn't exist, I'm going to kill God. So then you take him right out of the picture. But the problem is you're blaming in the first place. So it's kind of like, I'm going to look for an external reason for this. And the whole problem with blame is that when you start blaming, that's when you harm yourself. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur says, when faults of others delude and misguide you, introspect and find faults in yourself. Nobody can harm you unless you harm yourself. Interesting, because generally if we're averse to finding faults in ourselves and taking the blame. The Queen didn't want to find fault with herself or take the blame. But it could be inferred in some way that it was her fault and she was to blame to some degree. We can maybe ask later on if any of the devotees could see any reasons why the Queen could be blamed for that. But anyway, instead, she decided she didn't want to do that, and she was going to put the problem outside rather than deal it with herself. And by doing that, the Queen is harming herself. This is what Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur is explaining. If you find fault with yourself, then you're okay. When you find fault with somebody else, then you're harming yourself. And it's the immediate knee-jerk reaction that when you find somebody's finding fault with you, then you immediately want to find fault with them. There's a nice book called Greetings from Vrindavan by Damodar Swami, and he said it got back to him that people were criticizing him, and his initial reaction was, I started criticizing them. And then he said, but then I looked at the bigger picture and saw that maybe these people are just vehicles for my karma to come. And then he tried to bring Krishna into the picture and whatever lesson he was supposed to learn, and seeing the hand of God in what was going on. So that's a much nicer paradigm to function in. But interesting, isn't it? The Bhaktisiddhanta is saying, when you are deluded and misguided, because generally we don't think, when we find a fault, we think we're onto something here, like a little inspector when he has his magnifying glass and he's on the trail and he's finding all the clues and he's thinking, I'm really onto something. Look, there's a drop of blood and there's a knife over there. Okay, we're going to find who did this, So that's generally the tendency, isn't it, that we think we're getting places. And Bhaktisiddhanta is saying, no, just introspect. Don't find fault with others. Don't try and go on some investigation trail. Investigate yourself. Find fault with yourself. And that's generally, we're averse to that because, you're thinking, well, there's so many things I'm already dealing with. And then on top of that, you want me to find fault with myself. I'm already discouraged. And then on top of that, I'm going to have to find fault with myself. I'm going to be so discouraged. But actually, it's actually the opposite. Because this is what self-realization is all about. Self-realization is about realizing ourselves, realizing our shortcomings. And if other people have their problems, then okay, that's their problems, but they'll have to realize that for themselves. By me realizing their problems doesn't help them to realize them. And it misdirects me and turns my attention away from myself and my shortcomings and working on my shortcomings because I'm so worried about everybody else, So it's interesting how blame works. And Prabhupada is referring it to as a condition. So it's interesting, Mahaprabhu says that invariably in Srila Prabhupada's letters, someone would be complaining about, the temple commander or the temple this or the GBC or something. And Prabhupada would practically never pursue it. He would turn around and say, well, what will you do then? What will you do to contribute? How will you fill in the gap? What will you do? How will you help the situation? And there's one letter where he says, any problem you experience with the devotees is due to your lack of Krishna consciousness and not theirs. And then he says, is this clear? So he really puts it back on the person who's writing the letter. So the devotees were very cautious about approaching Srila Prabhupada about criticisms of other devotees because they realized that it would be turned right back on them. The idea of pushing somebody under the spotlight is that you're going to be in the dark. But Krishna explains that if you deride the devotee, apichet sudarachara, okay, he's trying, he's made a mistake, that's fine. I'm helping him, I'm dealing with it. And if you deride that devotee, if you humiliate that devotee, then you're in a bigger mess than the person who's fallen down, which is interesting because you would think, well, I'm following all the principles. I've never missed Mangalati in 75 years. I do 1,000 books a week. I'm a cool guy, but look at the state of him. So you're now in a worse situation. In fact, I just had an interesting story. A bird flew over. The king had a party, and he was giving all the poor citizens a pot of kittery, and the bird flew over with a snake in its mouth. And the snake was dying, and it went, and a bit of poison spitted out of its mouth and landed in the kittery. And of course, nobody saw it. So the citizen was eating the kittery, and then he died. And everybody's crowding around. And then Yamaraj he's asking Chitragupta, who's the where does the bad karma go here? Who do we give the reaction to? And Chitragupta says, well, it's the king. He made the kittery. And Yamaraj said, yeah, he made the kittery, but he didn't want to put a poison. He was just trying to help the citizens, the poor citizens. Well, it must be the bird then. No, it's not the bird. The bird's just flying past. Well, it must be the snake. No, it's not the snake. It can't be the snake. And so, the snake's just been killed. It didn't have anything to do with it. It didn't want to get killed. And then this old lady comes up and she says, just see, the king has killed one of his citizens. And then Yamaraj looks at Chitragupta and says, give her the karma. So she got the reaction. Not the bird, not the snake, not the king, but the old lady. Yeah, it's the king. I never liked that king. Look at that, he's killed one of the citizens. What a disgrace. All right, wham, there goes the karma. Interesting, eh? Apichet sudaracharo. Okay, he's fallen down, he's got a problem. When Krishna's dealing with it, he'll give him whatever he needs to rectify him. So that's God's job. And our job is to work on ourselves. And if we deride and push someone into the spotlight, it's funny how it works actually. When you push someone in the spotlight actually goes on you. Krishna's like, who's this? Who's making this criticism? Who's got this problem? Okay, what's your track record? What have you been doing? What's your devotion? Where's your humility? Where's your compassion? Immediately the spotlight gets spun round on the person who's shining the spotlight. So the queen's blaming, she's condemning God. So she's definitely having a lapse in faith because, God's there. Why does he allow these things to take place? But there's a lot of other factors involved. So she blames Supreme Providence for her son's death. Normally a father should die first. So we see it's like if you have a clock and it says on the clock, look after this clock, it's really delicate. And you say, hey, listen, guys, I've got this amazing clock, it's really delicate. Why don't we have a game of football? Yeah, use the clock. So they're booting the clock all around the room, kicking it up, bouncing it off the walls, kicking it up in the air, heading it into the net. And then later on, they put the clock back on the wall. And they're like, hold on a second. That's not the right time. That's like 3.5 hours. In fact, just when we started playing football, it's The time hasn't gone on from then. It's 3.5 hours out. What a useless. Who made this clock in the first place? What a useless clockmaker. So there are so many things going wrong in today's society: illicit sex, intoxication, meat eating, gambling, abortion, mass slaughter of animals, pollution of the air, the water, melting of the polar cap. It's a chaos. And then people say, I don't think I believe in God because things don't seem to be going so well. So you have to look after the clock nicely. You have to follow nicely what the human form of life is meant for. And then everything works fine. And if you don't, then it causes problems. And one of the problems it causes, more than any other problem, is it causes atheism. Because then it's hard to see the hand of God. Everything is going wrong. There's so many diseases. Children are being born deformed, dying before their parents. Sons are killing their fathers. Mothers are killing their children. So then it's chaos. How can you... the environment is not going to be conducive for appreciating the presence of God. Shishi Kodanitai Mayapo Shashi Ki Jai. Of course, the presence of God is a big one, isn't it? It's a big, there's a lot in that statement, being in the presence of God, because Rupa Goswami explains it's the courtyard. There's a courtyard in the heart. And when you're chanting nicely, then you dance in that courtyard with the Lord. But to get there, you have to first of all have Him dancing on your tongue, and then dancing through your ear, and then finally into the heart. So it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. It can take a lifetime, actually. So if people dismiss the existence of God and don't devote their lives to coming into His presence, then they're not really going to get far, are they? Maybe they're underestimating what being in the presence of God means, I think even if you did a lifetime of trying to be in the presence of the Queen, it's doubtful. I mean, maybe you could maybe strap yourself to some famous building in London and have a placard, I want to see the Queen, or I'll starve myself to death or something, and eventually the Queen may come, but there's no guarantee. What to speak of Krishna? We listened to Srila Prabhupada give the class, didn't we, in the manner, and he was saying, because the Queen, sometimes you see the Queen in the corridor, then a fool will say, look, she's just ordinary. But normally a person, if he sees the Queen, he's like, wow, I just seen the Queen, So in the same way, Avajananti Mambuddha, when Krishna does appear, then people say, oh, he's just ordinary. But the Queen is still the Queen. Okay, so you've had the good fortune of seeing the Queen. Rejoice. Same with God, if He appears. But will you be able to see Him? Will you be able to see His hand at least? If you cannot see His face, can you see the hand of God in your life? Why has He put you in this situation? Why has He put these circumstances? Everyone's learning, isn't it? We're all learning in the classroom of life. And one of the first lessons we have to learn, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur is encouraging in his gems. He gives these gems, these like sutras of concentrated, realized knowledge, is don't harm yourself by blaming others. Introspect and find fault with yourself. It certainly takes the sting out of it, because you may see somebody doing something wrong, and then you look at yourself and think, well, I'm not that brilliant either, It certainly would make the approach a lot more gentle. My dear Prabhu, just wanted to say something. So normally the way it works, the way the clock works, if the clock's not being kicked around all over the room for 3 hours, then the clock works nicely. So normally the father dies after his son. Sorry, before his son. That's normally what happens. That's the way it should happen. And then they're blaming Providence. Oh, it's the whims of Providence. And that God must be considered inimical. So that is another, myself personally, I was brought up with a very kind of scary idea of what God was. And my parents taught me to be baptized in the church. and I had a meltdown. I just went hysterical, and I ran out the church. I was so frightened. To me, it looked like some kind of like really scary thing, you know, I'd seen in a horror movie. I was really frightened anyway, so I just ran out the church. So it's really important that children from an early age understand that God is all love. He's so kind. Everything that's taking place is his compassion. And can we tune into that? Can we appreciate the loving hand of the Lord behind everything that's taking place? And sometimes there's a tendency to say, with some people that follow religion, is, I want to show how much I love God by how much I hate you. The more I can show my hate and vindictiveness to you, the more that asserts that I'm such a powerful, strong lover of God, which really puts people off, you know. You can imagine your average atheist, if he sees a God-fearing person doing that to somebody else, it's really going to put them off. They think, well, if that's God, I think I'll take my chances with being an atheist. So the Amish, actually, they got some special award because somebody came in and there was a shooting and there was a lot of casualties. And they immediately forgave the person and went to his wife and asked, can we help in any way? And some big American Senate gave them an award, and he said it wasn't hard for them to do this because this is the way they live. This is who they are. They didn't have to think, I wonder if I should forgive him, you know. They just did it. It was like their natural reaction. So it's interesting that we live in a society where there is so little compassion. Of course, it's kind of understandable because there's so much animal killing going on. But anyway, people would get put off seeing people showing their hatred to assert their love for God. But at the same time, people would be very attracted if they saw that these people are so kind. Maybe there is a God after all, and maybe he's a kind, loving God because these are his servants and they're displaying so many wonderful qualities. Imagine what God must be like if his servants are so kind and compassionate and so forgiving like this. And Gandaki Prabhu gave a beautiful class a few days ago, and he was doing Sankirtan, and he wasn't doing so well on Sankirtan, and he was thinking maybe he should just give up doing Sankirtan. And one of the people that see him regularly on the street, they came over and they said, you have to keep doing it, because by people seeing you, they know that you're a God-conscious person. They know you've given your life to God. And by them seeing your determination, that will increase their faith that there must be a God. But if you give up and you don't go out, then they will think, well, maybe there isn't a God after all. Beautiful point, eh? Because we look at the book scores, you know, and we say, oh, he only did... In fact, one day he only did an invitation to the restaurant, but the person that got the invitation became a devotee. So you would look at that and think, oh, he's useless, you know. But you don't know how many people have watched him and started to believe in God. You know, that's a hard one. You'd need CCTV, you'd need about 500 devotees and 500 cameras with really powerful zoom lenses. And you'd have to be watching everybody, looking in the office windows and walking past, and he look at him. He looks like he's getting into thinking about believing in God. You probably find it hard to do that. But anyway, that's another score that doesn't go on the sheet. How many people do you inspire to believe that there must be a God by how you perform in the public forum? Your performance is your preaching also. How you conduct yourself. Do you look healthy? Do you look happy? Do you look fearless about dying? Do you exhume these qualities? There's a lot of communication goes on a very subtle level. We had that devotee here, Prabhupada disciple. Oh, I think his name was Tejas Prabhu, and he was saying they were trying to get rid of Dale Carnegie, and the judge says, "Is it true that you don't know anything in terms of academics and education?" He said, "It is true." He said, "It is true, Your Honor." He said, "But he said, I do have a desk with 10 buttons on it, and you can ask me anything about anything, any problem about anything, and I know which button to press to bring the appropriate person in to deal with that. And he said, and that's why I'm the boss. And the judge says, okay, fair enough. And he stayed the boss. So the ability, what I've noticed going around shops and businesses is the people that are successful in business are the ones that can read people. They're very, very shrewd, and they can see. So you may behaving in such a way that they're becoming convinced or they're getting put off, I mean, I had one contact phone me up. He says, one of your devotees is coming around here and he's asking for a donation. He said, but I think he's not following the regulative principles. And this devotee doesn't even, I mean, he's got a few books. I don't know how he found out about that. And so anyway, so it was actually a fact, And he says, I'd prefer you to come round instead. So I go around to see him instead. He's been here, actually. He's got rides on a bike. So, yeah, that's kind of scary, actually. These professional people, okay, maybe they went there for Mangalarti this morning and they haven't got a dhoti on. But they're also spirit souls. And they also have a Lord in the heart. And they're also being directed in their own way. They have their own intuition. And they're very aware, very conscious of how people are and what's going on in their hearts and minds. So, interesting subject, blame. Actually, it is not the creator, but the conditioned soul who is inexperienced. He does not know how the subtle laws of fruitive activity work. And without knowledge of these laws of nature, he ignorantly criticizes the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So what's the solution for that? The solution is become so spiritually advanced that you become Trikaligya. Because Trikaligya, you can see past, present, and future. And it's very hard. If you're trying to watch a film, it's very hard to work out what's going on if you're only watching 10 seconds of it. You see, did you see the film such and such? Well, I saw 10 seconds of it. I couldn't figure out why he got shot and then why that guy jumped off a cliff with a fruit basket on his head. Couldn't work that out at all, Well, if you'd have seen what was happening before and you'd seen what was going to happen after, then you'd know what was going on. Now, only Trikaligya can do that. And if you're not Trikaligya, then you just have to accept, because I'm inexperienced and my perception is very, very compromised, I'm just going to accept that this is probably a perfect and complete arrangement taking place here, although I'm really finding it hard to get a handle on this. And you may have to wait some time, because generally it's easier to see the hand of God in hindsight, certainly than in foresight, and certainly as to what's happening right now. So he does not know how the subtle laws of fruitive activity work. So if you're a very gross person, then it'll be very hard to appreciate subtle things. And that's why we encourage following 4 regulative principles and establishing ourselves in the mode of goodness, because Sattva Gun is illuminated by knowledge. So a person in Sattva Gun, it's easier. And it's interesting that a symptom of a person in the mode of ignorance is he's expert at insulting others. That's interesting, because generally people take pride, don't they, in their ability to insult others. We have a whole vocabulary of words we can use to insult others. But that's just a symptom of somebody in the mode of ignorance. So, no wonder there's problems in today's society. How often do you pick up a newspaper and it'll say such and such happened, and then, well, obviously the hand of God is involved here, and this person, due to some past activity, has therefore now got his comeuppance. It's very rare that you'll read that narrative, isn't it? Usually the narrative, the word I've noticed most on newspaper headlines is the word fury. It's there practically every week. You'll find someone is furious with someone. Everyone's angry. Everyone's in the mode of ignorance. Everyone is blaming somebody. And that's ultimately what conspiracy theory is all about. We've got to blame somebody, something happens when that earthquake opened up on that nuclear plant, wherever it was, in Fukushima. So the conspiracy theorists were, oh yeah, so obviously, probably we should blame, they probably built it like that because they wanted to kill a load of people, Or maybe it was just an accident. Maybe they were just stupid and they just made a mistake and they're going to read into it. Now, they probably got around a desk in a smoky, dark room and they were like, okay, guys, we're going to bump off. I know we'll put a nuclear plant on the earthquake fault line. That's it. Well, we'll bump off about 200,000 people. Yeah, that sounds like a good one, So then you have like turbocharged blame. You have blame, which is being fueled by paranoia. And paranoia is extreme paranoia is the conception that the whole universe is revolving around you, that your conception, your perception, your paradigm is the absolute truth. That's like extreme, when people are actually mentally there's something wrong there, then paranoia is this idea that everything is revolving around you and that your perception of things is the absolute truth. So we did a mental health first aid course, didn't we? And they were saying that during the pandemic it was bad, but after the pandemic it's actually worse. There's a huge tidal wave, a tsunami now of cocaine coming in really cheap and everyone's on it. We were up in Banff, Banff's like a tiny town. And the boss was telling me in the Spotty Bag shop, if he's listening, Haribo, his son went into the loo and there's a huge queue for the cubicle. Nobody wants to use the normal places because they're all going in and, and you don't want anyone to see them doing this. So there's this huge queue. And he said 95% of them in the pub are on this hard narcotics. So, and that's going to create so many, they were saying in the mental health first aid that is going to cause huge mental problems because you swing so much one way and then to balance, you have to swing so much the other way. And when you swing so much the other way, you go from extremely positive to extremely negative, and it can be crushing, So, well, what we're seeing out there is a breakdown, actually. Everything is starting to break down. The whole system is not working anymore. And it's all falling apart at the seams, Everything is non-sustainable. You can't have non-sustainable for long because that's the whole point. It's not sustainable. So it just destroys itself. And then when it comes crashing down and everything goes to pot, then it's whether or not we've still got something left after we've ravaged the earth. We've squeezed every last drop we can out of the earth. And then eventually we ruin the earth. We have to go flying off in a spaceship and hang around for hundreds of years until everything clears and then we can repopulate again or go somewhere else. Trash this planet? Okay, let's hop off somewhere else and go and trash that one, But non-sustainable is not sustainable. And sustainable life and sustainable relationships, the emotional bank account, is encouraging each other, praising each other, and just finding fault with yourself. You can't really go wrong, can you, if you do that? Do you know, I've gone on that long, we don't actually have time for questions. So I'm so sorry, because I normally like to have a little question and answer session. But if anybody has any questions, they can always approach me after the class. And I'd just like to finish with Iskan Guru Vrinda Ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Shishi Koranitai Maya Pashashi Ki Jai, Gaura Premanandi Haribo.
Prabhu Ki Jai.